Among the ranks of presidential losers, General Winfield Scott is generally not all that remembered for his political acumen. If anything, he's remembered for his military career during the Mexican-American War and brief time as the head of the United States Armed Forces at the beginning of the Civil War. But we have one object here, and actually it's paired with an object from Abraham Lincoln, depicting these figures in an interesting manner. When you think of the campaign objects that we have here, they're mostly oriented towards adults. It makes sense. Adults vote. Adults support candidates. Children aren't necessarily involved in the presidential campaigns. But these objects here are children's plates. If you look around the edge of the plates, you see the ABCs. Maybe when you were growing up, you had something, a modern iteration of this, a placemat with the ABCs and a map of the United States, or a list of the presidents, or your multiplication tables. This was a way for young children in the middle of the 19th century to work on literacy at the dining room table. It was a learning experience. They could be served food and then work on their ABCs. But the figures depicted were also important figures of their day. So that would spark a conversation. Well, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, who is this figure here? Who's the man with the beard? Who's the man in the military uniform? And it would be an opportunity for parents then to educate about these candidates, about these important figures. So when we think about the ways that politics are part of the everyday life of Americans, this is one of the ways that it is even part of the raising of children. In a very early sense, just learning how to read, you're learning about the political process. William Jennings Bryan is the most well-known loser in the history of Illinois electoral politics. Born in Salem, Illinois, Bryan attended Illinois College in Jacksonville before making his mark as a congressman, an attorney, but most importantly, an orator in the state of Illinois. In 1896, 1900, and 1908, he was the Democratic nominee for president, and each of those three candidacies resulted in a resounding loss. Now, Bryan, even though he was a three-time presidential loser, was nevertheless one of the most influential Democratic politicians of the late 19th and early 20th century. And we see him depicted here on this tin plate that a supporter would bring into their home and proudly display that, yes, I am with Bryan. I support his stance on bimetallism, the use of silver along with gold to determine the cost of money. I am in support of Bryan's stance on regulating the railroads or regulating the banks and trusts. I support Bryan's joining together with the Populist Party in a fusion candidacy. Bryan was an important figure not only for losing frequently, but changing the dynamics of presidential elections in and of themselves. Because Bryan was an incredibly powerful orator. And in the late 19th century, that was a skill that only worked if you were in front of people, recording technology being relatively rudimentary at the time. So Bryan went to the people. He spoke on train platforms across the country, in auditoriums and halls and churches, in parks, and wherever anyone would let him speak. And this was seen as transformative because prior to this, it was below the dignity of the office to actively seek the presidency. Campaigning for oneself was seen as unbecoming, as his opponent did, William McKinley, who campaigned from his front porch. He didn't go out and give big campaign speeches. He didn't travel on whistle-stop tours, whereas Bryan went to the people directly and used his rhetorical skills to solicit voters. So even though he ultimately lost the presidency 3 times, in that initial election of 1896 and in his subsequent 2 campaigns, he transformed the way that candidates campaigned for the presidency in a process that continues today as candidates give whistle-stop tours or go to diners or church groups or try to glad hand with prospective voters. This is something that was pioneered by William Jennings Bryan.